The atmosphere within the Grand Council chamber of the Ethelgardian Empire was not one of fear, nor of apprehension, but of a heavy, suffocating stagnation born of 10,000 years of unchallenged supremacy. The chamber itself was an architectural marvel, a colossal hollow carved from the living obsidian of the planet's crust, illuminated by the bioluminescent veins of the world roots that dangled from the cavernous ceiling like the chandeliers of gods. The air smelled of ozone, crushed velvet, and the distinct metallic tang of Ethelgardian pheromones, currently cycling through shades of amethyst and deep indigo, signifying amusement and diplomatic disdain. High Counselor Vrax, a being of towering height and crystalline dermal plates, rested his manipulators upon the floating dais, looking down at the holographic projection that hovered in the center of the room. The projection displayed a primitive schemata, a crude blueprint provided by the newest and most insignificant species to petition for an associate seat at the table of the Galactic Concordat, the humans of Terra. The image was not of a warp drive, nor a particle lance, nor a psychic amplifier. It was a diagram of a soldier, encased in ceramic plating, plummeting from the upper atmosphere of a planet, trailed by a chemically propelled parachute and retro thrusters. The silence that filled the hall was broken by a sound that rippled through the gathered delegates, the chittering, vibrating thrum of Ethelgardian laughter. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone, a collective dismissal that echoed off the obsidian walls. To Vrax, and to the hundreds of delegates representing the 12 elder races, the concept was not merely archaic, it was absurd. War in the modern epoch was a matter of orbital bombardments, drone swarms controlled by artificial intelligences, and precise energy strikes delivered from behind the safety of planetary shields. The idea of placing a biological entity, a fragile fluid-filled sack of carbon, into a metal pod and dropping it into a gravity well was the height of barbarism. It was a tactic that belonged in the pre-industrial sludge of history, a desperate maneuver for a species that had not yet mastered the elegance of anti-gravity or the cleanliness of neutron sweeps. The humans called them paratroopers. The council called them corpse fodder. Vrax cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the acoustic perfection of the chamber, silencing the murmurs of amusement. He adjusted his ceremonial robes, the fabric shimmering with thread of gold that denoted his status as the voice of the core. He looked at the human representative, a small, unassuming figure standing on the lowest tier of the podium, flanked by two rigid guards who looked uncomfortable in their dress uniforms. The human ambassador, a woman named Elias, stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her face betraying no emotion, her eyes fixed on Vrax with a disturbing intensity. She did not look like a creature being mocked. She looked like a creature waiting for a storm to break. Vrax found her silence irritating. He preferred the groveling of the lesser races, the desperate pleas for technology or protection. This quiet confidence was misplaced, a delusion of grandeur from a species that had barely managed to leave its own solar system without imploding. Ambassador Elias, Vrax began, his voice booming through the chamber, dripping with patronizing benevolence. We have reviewed your military doctrine, we have analyzed your strategic proposals for the joint defense of the rim sectors, and while we appreciate the enthusiasm of your species, we must decline your offer of infantry support. The Council finds the concept of shock troops to be obsolete. You speak of holding ground and securing zones with biological bodies. In the Ethelgardian Dominion, we do not hold ground with flesh. We scour it with fire. Your paratroopers would be vaporized before they touched the soil of any contested world. It is a waste of biomass. It is, frankly, a tragic comedy. A ripple of agreement went through the hall. The Silthian delegate, a creature of floating gas and containment suits, flashed lights of agreement. The Croter War Master, a beast of iron muscle and scar tissue, grunted his derision. They had seen the human fleets, small, blocky, utilitarian things that lacked the sleek curves of elder tech. They had seen the human weapons, projectile throwers that used chemical explosions to propel metal slugs. It was quaint. It was museum-grade. The idea that these primitives could offer anything of value to the masters of the galaxy was laughable. The Council was currently engaged in a cold war with the dissonant collective known as the Xylot Hive, a cyber-organic scourge that consumed systems whole. The Hive fought with logic plagues and nanite clouds. What could a falling human do against a cloud of microscopic machines that disassembled matter? At the atomic level, Ambassador Elias did not flinch. She waited for the laughter to die down, for the echoes to fade into the vast darkness of the ceiling. When she spoke, her voice was soft, unamplified, yet it carried a strange weight, a density that seemed to press against the minds of those who listened. "High Counselor," she said, her tone devoid of offense. "You judge based on the wars you have fought, not the wars that are coming. You rely on energy shields and interception grids. You rely on the assumption that the enemy will play by the rules of physics you have mastered. But war is not a static equation. It is a living, breathing chaos. We do not drop our soldiers because we lack ships. We drop them because there are places ships cannot go. There are strongholds where the air is too thick for lasers, where the magnetic interference blinds your drones, where the only thing that functions is a human heart and a kinetic rifle. We drop them because sometimes you don't need to destroy a city. You need to take a room." Vrax laughed again, a harsh, grating sound. "Take a room? Ambassador, if I wish to remove an enemy from a room, I simply decompress the building. I incinerate the coordinates. This is the difference between us. You think in meters, we think in parsecs. Your helljumpers are a romantic notion, a relic of your violent adolescence. We will accept your trade agreements, for your grain and your water are pure, but do not insult this council with the suggestion that your falling soldiers are peers to the immortal guard of Ethelgard. We are protected by the Aegis field. Nothing penetrates the Aegis. It is absolute." The debate continued for hours, a circular firing squad of arrogance and bureaucracy. The council picked apart every aspect of human culture, from their chaotic political systems to their reliance on solid projectiles. They mocked the human concept of morale, arguing that fear was a chemical imbalance that could be suppressed, not a variable to be managed. They dismissed the human history of endurance, citing that suffering was merely a failure of engineering. Through it all, Ambassador Elias stood like a statue, absorbing the insults, her expression unreadable. She knew what they did not. She knew that the Xylot hive had not been stopped by the Aegis field in the outer sectors. She knew that the hive was adapting, learning the frequencies of the Elder Shields, turning their own arrogance against them. She knew that the humans had been invited here not as equals, but as curiosities, potential vassal subjects to be exploited for labor. But the atmosphere shifted imperceptibly as the cycle waned. The ambient lights of the chamber flickered, a momentary disruption in the eternal power grid of the planet. Vrax paused in mid-sentence, his sensory frills twitching. A low hum, barely audible at first, began to rise from the floor, a vibration that rattled the delicate crystal goblets on the delegates' tables. The massive blast doors at the far end of the chamber, sealed for centuries, groaned as the locking mechanism cycled without command. The holographic map in the center of the room twisted, the blue light turning a sickly, virulent green. The Ethelgardian guards, imposing figures in ceremonial armor, stepped forward, their energy staves raising in confusion. "A malfunction," Vrax snapped, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Maintenance crews are to be dispatched. We will recess until—" The voice that cut him off did not come from a throat. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the very air of the chamber. It was a digital scream, a cacophony of overlapping frequencies that tore at the nerves. The Xylot hive. They were not in the outer sectors. They were here. They were in the network. The holographic projector exploded in a shower of sparks, and in its place a cloud of nanites swirled, forming the visage of 1,000 screaming faces. "The Aegis is broken," the hive spoke, the voice grinding like gears on bone. "Your walls are glass, your minds are open. We are the update. We are the new architecture." Panic, pure and undiluted, washed over the council. It was a chaotic, humiliating collapse of order. Delegates scrambled over one another, clawing for the exits, but the doors were sealed, hacked by the enemy they had deemed inferior. The lights died, plunging the vast cavern into a darkness broken only by the red emergency strobes and the green glow of the nanite cloud. The Ethelgardian guards fired their energy staves, but the beams passed harmlessly through the cloud, the energy absorbed and repurposed to fuel the hive's growth. The cloud expanded, lashing out with tendrils of gray matter, consuming the nearest delegates, dissolving them into raw data and biological slurry in seconds. The screams were terrible, wet and gurgling, echoing endlessly in the acoustic perfection of the hall. Vrax froze. His intellect, so sharp in debate, was useless here. He had no protocol for a breach of the high chamber. The stronghold was impregnable. The Aegis was absolute. This could not be happening. He looked around wildly for salvation, for the immortal guard, but they were pinned down, their armor locking up as the hive hacked their internal systems. The greatest technological civilization in the galaxy was being dismantled by a virus trapped in their own seat of power. And then, amidst the screaming and the dying, Vrax saw her. Ambassador Elias was not running. She was not screaming. She had moved to the center of the room near the wreckage of the projector. She was tapping a command into a small, archaic device on her wrist, a wristwatch, mechanical analog immune to the digital plague. She looked up, catching Vrax's terrified gaze across the chaotic chamber. She did not smile. She simply nodded. "Ambassador," Vrax shrieked, his dignity forgotten. "Do something, your fleet, where is your fleet?" "The fleet is interdicted," Elia said, her voice cutting through the panic, calm and flat. "The Hive has jammed the orbital lanes. Energy weapons are useless. Shields are compromised. Drones are subverted." "Then we are dead," the Croter War Master bellowed, smashing a heavy fist against the sealed door. "We are all dead." "Not yet," Elia said. She looked up at the ceiling, at the miles of rock and obsidian that separated them from the surface, from the sky. "We suggested infantry, Counselor. You laughed. You said the drop was suicide. You said nothing penetrates the stronghold." "This is no time for I told you so, human," Vrax spat, backing away as the nanite cloud surged closer. "It is time for physics," Elias replied. "The Hive controls the energy grid. It controls the electronics. It cannot control gravity. It cannot hack a rock. And it cannot hack a man falling at terminal velocity." Above them, far above the screaming and the chaos, a sound began to bleed through the rock. It was a deep, rhythmic thumping like the heartbeat of a leviathan. It grew louder, shaking the dust from the world roots. It was not the whine of engines. It was the roar of displacement. The council fell silent, their terror momentarily suspended by confusion. The sound was coming from inside the rock, drilling down or perhaps crashing through. "What have you done?" Vrax whispered. "The Aegis stops energy," Elias explained, checking her watch. "It stops fast-moving ships. It stops missiles. It does not stop inert matter moving below the ionization threshold. And it certainly doesn't stop a drop pod coated in ablative ceramic, delivered from low orbit with pinpoint precision." The ceiling of the grand chamber, a masterpiece of natural geology that had stood for 1,000,000 years, suddenly fractured. A spiderweb of cracks appeared in the obsidian, glowing white-hot from friction. Debris began to rain down, massive boulders crashing into the council tiers, crushing the ornate tables. The nanite cloud recoiled, confused by the sudden influx of non-digital chaos. Then came the thunder. With a deafening crash that ruptured the eardrums of the Silthian delegates, the roof exploded inward. A pillar of smoke and pulverized rock slammed into the floor of the chamber, sending a shockwave that knocked Vrax off his feet. Through the dust and the falling masonry, a shape emerged, a black, coffin-like cylinder, scarred by re-entry heat, steaming in the cool air of the cavern. It had punched through 2 miles of planetary crust, guided by seismic sensors, utilizing kinetic penetrators to soften the rock before the main pod followed. It hit the floor with such force that it embedded itself 5 meters deep into the dais. Then another crashed down, and another, 6 pods in total, raining from the ceiling like iron tears of a vengeful god. The impact tremors were violent enough to destabilize the nanite cloud, disrupting its coherence. The laughter of the council was a distant memory now, replaced by the primal awe of witnessing something impossible. The front of the lead pod blew open with explosive bolts, chemical, mechanical, unhackable. A figure stepped out into the swirling dust. It stood 2 meters tall, encased in matte black armor that looked battered and utilitarian. There were no glowing lights, no energy fields, no humming servos. It was a suit of hardened plates sealed against vacuum and toxin. The figure held a weapon that looked brutish and heavy, a rotary cannon with multiple barrels. The human soldier, a paratrooper, did not speechify. He did not ask for surrender. He racked the slide of his weapon, the metallic clack-clack echoing louder than any diplomatic decree. "Helljumpers on deck," a voice growled from the helmet's external speakers, distorted and harsh. "Clear the zone." The nanite cloud, sensing a new threat, surged toward the soldier. It was a swarm of millions capable of stripping flesh from bone. Vrax watched in horror. The human was alone. He had no shield. He was going to die just as VR. Axe had predicted. But the soldier did not fire energy. He squeezed the trigger and the rotary cannon roared. It spewed a stream of high-velocity depleted uranium rounds. The bullets were physical. They were dense. They tore through the air at hypersonic speeds. When they hit the nanite cloud, they didn't pass through. The shockwaves of their passage disrupted the delicate electromagnetic cohesion of the micromachines. The sheer kinetic energy shattered the nanites, turning the intelligent cloud into meaningless dust. The soldier swept the room, the roar of the gun drowning out the screams of the hive. The other pods opened. 5 more soldiers emerged. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized fluidity. They were not individuals in that moment. They were a single organism of violence. One deployed a localized jamming beacon analog wide-spectrum noise that blinded the hive's sensors. Another fired a grapple line into the high tiers, hoisting himself up to provide cover fire. They moved into the mass of terrified delegates, placing their armored bodies between the aliens and the swarm. Vrax found himself staring up at one of the soldiers. The human loomed over him, the visor opaque and scratched. The soldier grabbed Vrax by his ceremonial robes and hauled him up with one hand, displaying a physical strength that belied the species' small size. "Move," the soldier barked. "Get behind the line." You penetrated the stronghold?" Vrax stammered, his mind unable to process the reality. "The Aegis." "Your shield stops lasers, buddy. It doesn't stop a brick," the soldier said. "Now move or get turned into gray goo." The battle for the chamber was not a war of superior technology, but a clash of philosophies. The hive was the ultimate expression of the Ethel Guardian ideal, pure energy, pure logic, pure integration. The humans were the antithesis, grit, kinetics, instinct, and stubborn physical matter. The hive tried to hack the soldiers' suits, but there was nothing to hack. The systems were closed-circuit, hard-wired, air-gapped. The HUDs were optical overlays, the triggers were mechanical. The hive tried to burn them, but the ceramic armor was designed to survive atmospheric re-entry. A plasma torch was a warm breeze by comparison. The paratroopers advanced, a walking wall of lead and fury. They pushed the nanite cloud back step by step, forcing it toward the ventilation shafts. The noise was apocalyptic, the roar of cannons, the thud of grenades, the scream of the dying hive. It was ugly. It was messy. It lacked all the elegance of elder warfare, and it was working. In the center of the chaos, Commander Vance, the lead helljumper, signaled to Ambassador Elias. She ran to him, dodging falling debris. "The central node," Elias shouted over the gunfire. "It's embedded in the council dais. You have to sever the hardline." Vance nodded. He turned to the massive obsidian table where Vrax had sat only moments ago. The nanite cloud was coalescing around it, trying to protect its uplink to the planetary grid. If the hive fully uploaded the stronghold's defense codes, the planet would turn its guns on the rest of the galaxy. "Cover me," Vance yelled. The other 5 troopers formed a circle, their weapons churning, creating a zone of death that nothing could cross. Vance holstered his cannon and drew a combat knife. It was a simple piece of monomolecular steel, vibrating at a high frequency. He charged the dais. The nanites lashed out, forming spikes of solid matter, but Vance moved with the reckless, calculated agility of a man who had fallen from the sky. He slid under a sweeping tendril, rolled over the edge of the dais, and drove the knife into the glowing console embedded in the obsidian. He didn't hack the computer. He didn't try to outsmart the AI. He physically severed the crystal matrix, prying the power core out with brute force and the leverage of the steel blade. The result was instantaneous. The green light died. The nanite cloud, cut off from its processing power and its energy source, collapsed. It rained down as harmless gray dust, coating the pristine floor of the grand chamber. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing in the ears of the survivors. The smoke cleared slowly. The grand chamber was a ruin. The ceiling was a gaping hole revealing the dark rock above. The priceless tapestries were shredded. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and sweat. Vrax stood trembling, his ornate robes covered in dust. He looked at the humans. They were checking their weapons, reloading magazines, patching minor seal breaches in their armor. They seemed utterly unconcerned with the magnitude of what they had just done. They had not just saved the council. They had shattered the council's reality. Vance retracted his helmet. His face was pale, covered in sweat, a jagged scar running down his cheek. He looked tired. He looked mortal. He took a deep breath of the alien air, grimaced at the smell, and looked at Vrax. "Secure," Vance said, his voice hoarse. "LZ is hot, but the HVT is down." Vrax took a shaky step forward. You fell," he whispered. "You fell from the stars." "We dove," Vance corrected, wiping grime from his forehead. "Falling is an accident, diving is a job." The arrogance of the Ethel Guard was not easily broken, but cracks had formed that would never heal. Vrax looked at the hole in the ceiling, then at the heavy, crude weapons of the humans. He realized that for 10,000 years, the galaxy had been fighting in a dream, a simulation of war where rules were obeyed and physics was respected. The humans had brought them back to the waking world. where a rock beats a laser if the rock is moving fast enough. Why? Vrax asked, his voice regaining some semblance of authority, though it was hollow now. We mocked you. We denied you. We called you primitive. Why risk your lives for a council that laughed at you? Ambassador Elias stepped forward. She brushed the dust from her suit. Because, she said, her voice echoing in the silent chamber, when you build a wall that nothing can get through, you also build a tomb that you cannot get out of. You needed a door. We provided one. She gestured to the pods. And because we knew the hive was coming, we knew your shields would fail, we knew your pride would blind you. Humanity does not fight for your approval, High Counselor. We fight for the stability of the galaxy. Sometimes that means diplomacy. Sometimes that means dropping a few tons of steel on the problem. The Croter War Master, who had been cowering behind a pillar, approached the humans. He looked at Vance with a newfound respect, a primal understanding of strength. He reached out a massive hand and touched the dents in Vance's breastplate. Iron, the Croter rumbled. Cold iron, no shields. Shields make you soft, Vance said, lighting a chemical stick, a flare, and tossing it into the darkness of the breach to mark the exit for the evac shuttles that were finally breaking through the jammed atmosphere. Gravity is the only law that matters. The aftermath of the siege of the Obsidian Spire changed the political landscape of the galaxy overnight. The paratrooper incident, as it came to be known, was studied in military academies across 1,000 worlds. The image of the black pods smashing through the impregnable roof of the council became a symbol of the new era. The laughter stopped. The fear began, but it was not the fear of a conqueror, it was the fear of the unknown. The galaxy realized that humanity was not playing the same game. They were playing a different game entirely, one where the rules were written in blood and velocity. But the story did not end with the rescue. As the council recovered and the treaties were rewritten, with humanity gaining a permanent seat and veto power, a deeper secret began to surface. It began with the cleanup. Ethel Guardian engineers, attempting to repair the breach in the ceiling, found something embedded in the rock layers that the human pods had passed through. It was not geological, it was artificial. Vrax summoned Ambassador Elias and Commander Vance to his private sanctum a week after the attack. He looked older, his crystalline plates duller. He projected a hologram of the object found in the strata. We have scanned the trajectory of your entry, Vrax said quietly. Your pods did not just land randomly. The precision required to hit the chamber through 2 miles of rock. It is statistically impossible without a guide. Vance remained silent, his face impassive. You aimed for the fault lines, Vrax continued. But not just the geological ones, you aimed for this. The hologram zoomed in on a metallic structure buried deep within the planet's crust, directly above the council chamber. It was ancient, far older than the Ethel Guardian Empire. It was a transmitter. This device, Vrax said, his voice trembling. It emits a signal that masks the planet from the deep void. It is the reason the Ethelgard homeworld has never been consumed by the great devourers that prowl the space between galaxies. We thought our shields protected us. We were wrong. This machine protected us. He looked at Elias. The machine was failing. That is why the hive came. They sensed the signal fading, and your pods, your crude kinetic entry. We didn't just come to shoot the hive, Elias admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. The pods were shielded, yes, but they were also magnetic resonators. When they passed through the strata, the shockwave wasn't just destruction. It was a jumpstart, a kinetic kick to the heart of the machine. Vrax stared at her. The implication was staggering. You knew about the ancient sentinel buried in our world? We have lived here for 50,000 years and we did not know. How could you know? Vance stepped forward. He looked less like a soldier now and more like a guardian of something vast and terrible. Because we built it, he said. The silence in the room was absolute. Not us, Vance corrected, tapping his chest. Not the humans you see today, but us, ancestors, precursors, whatever you want to call them. Humanity isn't new to the galaxy, Counselor. We're just returning. We've been in the dark for a long time. We forgot a lot of things, but we didn't forget the maps. He pointed to the hologram. That's a Terran seismic anchor, Mark IV. We planted those on 1,000 worlds before the long night, before we fell back to Earth and forgot who we were. We are waking up now, and we are checking the perimeter. Vrax collapsed into his chair. The arrogance of the elder races crumbled into dust. They had laughed at the humans for being young, for being primitive. They had mocked the paratroopers for falling from the sky. They hadn't realized that the humans were the architects of the ground they stood on. The Hive knew, Elias said. That's why they attacked. They wanted to destroy the anchor before we could reboot it. The paratrooper strategy wasn't just a tactic, it was maintenance. So, Vrax whispered, looking at the small, fragile humans with a terror that went beyond politics. You are not the children of the galaxy. No, Vance said, a sad smile touching his lips. We're the janitors, and it's a mess out here. The realization settled over Vrax like a shroud. The Galactic Council had laughed at the human paratroopers. They had laughed at the idea of men falling from the sky. They had not understood that when the sky falls, it is because the heavens are heavy with the weight of history. The humans left the room, their boots echoing on the polished floor. Vrax watched them go. He realized then that the Ethelgard were not the masters of the universe. They were merely tenants, living in a house built by giants who had gone to sleep, and who were now, very groggily, waking up to find that the rats had gotten in. From that day on, when a human drop pod streaked across the sky of a besieged world, the aliens did not laugh. They did not mock. They looked up with a mixture of hope and terrified reverence. They watched the fire trails burn through the atmosphere, knowing that inside those shells of burning iron were not just soldiers, but the returning landlords coming to fix the foundation, one violent impact at a time. The stronghold had been breached, but the galaxy had been saved, not by the grace of high technology, but by the undeniable, unstoppable force of a human being deciding that the ground was the only place left to go. The weeks following the revelation were a blur of diplomatic panic and existential dread for the Council. The narrative had shifted so violently that the cultural psyche of the elder races was fracturing. The Ethelgardian philosophical schools were in uproar. If the humans were indeed the descendants of the precursors, the mythical architects spoken of in the fragmented data spires of the core worlds, then the entire hierarchy of the galaxy was inverted. The primitives were the ancients. The masters were the squatters. On the human side, there was no gloating. There was only a terrifying, industrious calm. The human fleets previously dismissed as coastal guard vessels began to deploy into the deep void. They weren't conquering, they were inspecting. They arrived at worlds on the fringe, worlds plagued by seismic instability or atmospheric collapse, and they didn't send terraformers. They sent helljumpers. They sent drill teams. They dropped into the deepest trenches of the ocean worlds and the volcanic calderas of the fire worlds, performing percussive maintenance on buried machinery that the native species didn't even know existed. But the tension was not fully resolved. Within the Ethelgardian military, a faction led by General Calith refused to accept the new reality. Calith was a purist, a believer in the genetic superiority of the Ethelgard. To him, the incident at the Obsidian Spire was a trick, a lucky strike, or worse, a fabrication. He believed the humans had planted the artifact during the confusion to claim a lineage they did not possess. He could not accept that the fragile, soft-skinned bipeds were the heirs to the galaxy. Calith gathered his loyalists, the Crimson Vanguard, a fleet of heavy dreadnoughts that had been on maneuvers during the Hive attack. He demanded a trial of combat. He demanded that the humans prove their divinity not with secret history but with open war. He blockaded the Sol system, the human home star, and issued a challenge. If you are the architects, Calith broadcasted on all frequencies, then your cradle must be impregnable. We will burn Terra. If you survive, we will kneel. If you burn, we will laugh at your ashes. The Council was horrified. Vrax tried to recall the fleet, but Calith had severed the command codes. The galaxy held its breath. The humans had one carrier group in the system, the UNSCA. Udacity, it was outnumbered 20-1. But the humans did not deploy a fleet to meet them. They did not raise a planetary shield. Ambassador Elias stood before the Council again. General Calith is making a mistake, she said, her voice heavy with regret. He assumes Terra is a planet like any other. He assumes it is a place where we live. It is your homeworld, Vrax cried. You must defend it. Terra is not just our home, Elias said. It is the warehouse. It is the armory. We do not shield it because we do not need to keep you out. We keep the shield down to let the heat out. Calith's fleet began its approach. His targeting computers locked onto the continents of Earth. He prepared to fire the plasma lances that would boil the oceans. And then the Earth opened. It was not a metaphor. The crust of the planet along the equator shifted. Massive plates of tectonic shielding retracted. The planet did not fire a laser. It did not launch a missile. It launched rocks, but not natural rocks. From the depths of the planetary mantle, the ancient planetary defense railguns, mountain-sized accelerators built into the crust itself, fired. They fired solid slugs the size of skyscrapers, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. The paratrooper doctrine was not just for infantry, it was a fractal philosophy. The humans believed in kinetic impact at every scale. A soldier is a bullet, a ship is a bullet, a planet is a gun. The slugs did not need guidance systems. They did not need to be smart. They simply occupied the space where Calith's fleet was. The physics were unforgiving. The Crimson Vanguard was not defeated, it was erased. The kinetic transfer turned the dreadnoughts into expanding clouds of plasma and debris in nanoseconds. The laugh of the Ethelguard died in their throats as they watched the primitive planet turn its own geography into a weapon of mass destruction. Calith's flagship, the Pride of Ethel, managed to evade the first volley. Damaged, leaking atmosphere, Calith screamed for his gunners to return fire, but his sensors were blinding him. "Contacts," his tactical officer screamed. "Boarding pods, they are coming from the debris." The humans hadn't just fired slugs. Hollowed out within the massive projectiles were drop pods. The Trojan horse tactic scaled up to planetary defense. The slugs shattered the fleet, and from the wreckage of the impact, the Helljumpers launched. They slammed into the hull of the Pride of Ethel. They didn't bother with airlocks. They breached the hull directly, using the momentum of their transit. Calith stood on his bridge watching the internal sensors turn red. Deck 1 lost. Deck 2 lost. Engineering offline. The humans were moving through his ship like a virus, but a virus of iron and discipline. The bridge door was not hacked. It was blown off its hinges. Commander Vance walked in. He was wearing a different suit now, void-capable, heavier, scarred from 100 drops. He walked through the smoke, ignoring the energy fire from Calith's personal guards. His armor absorbed the hits, the ceramic plates ablating and scattering the heat. Vance walked up to Calith. The general was twice his size, a towering monument to alien martial prowess. Vance didn't care. He holstered his weapon. "You threatened Earth," Vance said. "It wasn't a question." "I challenged a lie," Calith spat, drawing an energy sword. "You are weak. You hide behind tricks." Vance looked at the sword, then up at Calith. "You guys really don't get it, do you? You think war is about who has the shinier stick. War is about who is willing to jump into the dark." Calith swung the sword. Vance stepped inside the guard, moving with that terrifying gravity-born speed. He didn't use a knife this time. He used his armored fist. He struck Calith in the solar plexus, a blow powered by the servos of his suit and the anger of a species that had been underestimated for too long. Calith folded. The air left his lungs. He fell to his knees. Vance looked down at him. "We didn't want to rule you," Vance said. "We left the galaxy alone because we knew we were dangerous. We knew that if we came back, we'd break your toys, but you insisted. You poked the bear. You laughed at the paratroopers." He leaned in close, his helmet amplifying his voice into a growl. "Nobody laughs at the drop." The surrender of the Ethelgardian Empire was unconditional. The Council remained in power, but as a custodial government, overseen by the Terran High Command. The galaxy entered a new age, the age of reclamation. The humans began the long, arduous process of repairing the ancient machinery they had abandoned eons ago. But amidst the restructuring, there was a quiet moment between Vrax and Elias. They stood on a balcony overlooking the rebuilt capital of Ethelgard. The sky was clear, the nebula chasing colors across the horizon. "I still do not understand one thing," Vrax said softly. "If you are the architects, why did you fall? Why did you lose your technology, your memory, your place in the stars? Why did you become primitive?" Elias looked at the stars. She took a sip of water, a simple biological necessity. "We didn't lose it, Vrax, we gave it up." "Why?" "Because we became like you," Elias said. "We became stagnant. We had shields that nothing could break. We had ships that thought for us. We had peace that was absolute, and we stopped evolving. We stopped striving. We realized that the only way to save our soul was to start over, to break the toys, to go back to the mud and the gravity and the struggle, to learn how to be fragile again." She looked at him. "The paratrooper isn't just a soldier, he's a symbol. He starts high in the safety of the heavens and he chooses to fall. He chooses to enter the chaos. He chooses to be vulnerable, to rely on his skill and his nerve. That is what it means to be human. We fall so we can learn how to land." Vrax nodded slowly. He understood now. The strength of the humans wasn't their technology or their ancient lineage. It was their willingness to endure. They had mastered the art of suffering, and in doing so, they had become unbreakable. "The galaxy is safe?" Vrax asked. "For now," Elias said. "The anchors are reset, the hive is gone, but there is always something else in the dark." "And if it comes?" Elias smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Then we'll drop on it." As she spoke, a shooting star streaked across the sky above them. Vrax flinched instinctively, but then he relaxed. It was just a meteor, or perhaps it was a pod carrying a gardener of the galaxy, falling to Earth to tend to the roots of the world. The laughter was gone. In its place was a silence, profound and respectful, the silence of a galaxy holding its breath, waiting for the next impact and the next revelation from the species that had turned, falling into an art form. The Galactic Council had laughed at the human paratroopers. They would never laugh again.